Back for day 17 of the 28 days of Black American History Month. I'm really excited about tonight. Tonight I plan to read from somebody that I'm really fond of, actually, one of my heroes, to be quite honest. Somebody who I couldn't imagine not having in this lifetime and know about in this lifetime, and yet I wish I had so much earlier. Because the impact that he's had in my life is changed my life. So he is a man of no introduction. He needs no introduction, but he just has been so prolific and so important to our community. He's paved the way for so many of us. He's made our experience and the way that we experience America today possible with the few freedoms that we have. None other than Mr. James Baldwin, y'all. I'm reading from a collection of his essays, and the one that I was thinking of doing today is called no, this is not the one. This isn't the one. This is the one. The American Dream and the American Negro. And I think I'll just jump in. I find myself, not for the first time, in the position of a kind of Jeremiah. It would seem to me that the question before the House is a proposition horribly loaded, that one's response to that question depends on where you find yourself in the world, what your sense of reality is. That is, it depends on assumptions we hold so deeply as to be scarcely aware of them. The white South African or Mississippi sharecropper or Alabama sheriff has a bottom, a system of reality which compels them to achieve when they face the Negro, that this woman, this man, this child must be insane to attack the system to which he owes his entire identity. For such a person, the proposition which we are trying to discuss here does not exist. On the other hand, I have to speak as one of the people who have been most attacked by the Western system of reality. It comes from Europe. That is how it got to America. It raises the question of whether or not civilization can be considered equal, or whether one civilization has a right to subjugate, in fact, to destroy another. Now, leaving aside all the physical factors one can quote, leaving aside the rape or murder, leaving aside the bloody catalog of oppression which we are too familiar with anyway, what the system does to subjugate is to destroy this sense of reality. It destroys his father's authority over him. His father can no longer tell him anything because his past has disappeared. In the case of the American Negro, from the moment you are born, every stick and stone, every face is white. Since you have not yet seen a mirror, you suppose you are too. It comes as a great shock around the age of 5, 6, or 7 to discover that the flag to which you have pledged allegiance, along with everybody else, has not pledged allegiance to you. It comes as a great shock to see Gary Cooper killing off the Indians, and although you are rooting for Gary Cooper, that the Indians are you. It comes as a great shock to discover that the country which is your birthplace and to which you owe your life and identity has not, in its whole system of reality, evolved any place for you. The disaffection and the gap between people, only to the basis of their skins, begins there and accelerates throughout your whole lifetime. You realize that you are 30 and you are having a terrible time. You have been through a certain kind of meal, and the most serious effect is against not the catalog of disaster, the policeman, the taxi driver, the waiters, the landlady, the banks, the insurance companies, the millions of details 24 hours of every day which spell out to you that you are a worthless human being. It is not that. By that time, you have begun to see it happening in your daughter, your son, or your niece or nephew. You are 30 by now, and nothing you have done has helped you escape the trap. But what is worse is that nothing you have done, and as far as you can tell, nothing you can do, will save your son or your daughter from having the same disaster and from coming to the same end. We speak about expense. There are several ways of addressing oneself to some attempt to find out what that word means here. From a very literal point of view, the harbors and the ports and the railroads of the country, the economy, especially in the South, could not conceivably be what they are if it had not been, and this is still so, for cheap labor. I'm speaking very seriously, and this is not an overstatement. I picked cotton, and I carried it to the market. I built the railroads under someone else's whip for nothing. For nothing. The Southern oligarchy, which has still today so very much power in Washington and therefore some power in the world, was created by labor and my sweat and the violation of my women and the murder of my children. This is the land of the free, the home of the brave. None can challenge that statement. It is a matter of historical record. In the Deep South, you are dealing with a sheriff or a landlord or a landlady or the girl at the Western Union desk. She doesn't know quite whom she is dealing with, by which I mean, if you are not part of a town and if you are a northern nigger, it shows in millions of ways. She simply knows that it is an unknown quantity and she wants to have nothing to do with it. You have to wait a while to get your telegram. We have all been through it. By the time you get to be a man, it is fairly easy to deal with. But what's happening to the poor white man's, the poor white woman's mind? It is, they have been raised to believe, and by now they helplessly believe that no matter how terribly some of their lives may be, and no matter what disaster overtakes them, there is one consolation like a heavenly revelation. At least they are not black. Whew. I suggest that of all the terrible things that could happen to a human being, that is one of the worst. I suggest what has happened to be the white Southerner is in some ways much worse than what has happened to Negroes there. Sheriff Clark in Selma, Alabama cannot be dismissed as a total monster. I'm sure he loves his wife and children and likes to get drunk. One has to assume that he is a man like me, but he does not know what drives him to use the club, to menace with the gun, and to use the cattle prod. Something awful must have happened to a human being to be able to put a cattle prod against a woman's breast. What happens to the woman is ghastly. What happens to the man who does it is in some ways much, much worse. Their moral lives have been destroyed by the plague called color. This is not being done 100 years ago, but in 1965 in a country which is pleased with what we call prosperity, with a certain amount of social coherence, which calls itself a civilized nation and which espouses the notion of freedom in the world. If it were white people being murdered, the government would find some way of doing something about it. We have a civil rights bill now. We have the 15th Amendment nearly 100 years ago. If it was not honored then, I have no reason to believe that the Civil Rights Bill will be honored now. The American soil is full of the corpses of my ancestors. Through 400 years and at least 3 wars, why is my freedom, my citizenship, in question now? What one begs the American people to do for all our sakes is simply to accept our history. It seems to me when I watch Americans in Europe that what they don't know about Europeans is what they don't know about me. They were not trying to be nasty to the French girl, rude to the French waiter. They did not know that they hurt their feelings. They didn't have any sense that this particular man or woman were human beings. They walked over them with the same sort of bland ignorance and condescension, the charm and cheerfulness with which they have patted me on the head and which made them upset when I was upset. Child. When I was brought up, I was taught in American history books that Africa had no history and that neither had I. I was a savage about whom the least said the better, who had been saved by Europe and who had been brought to America. Of course I believed it. I didn't have much choice. These were the only books there were. Everyone else seemed to agree. If you went out of Harlem, the whole world agreed. What you saw was much bigger, wider, cleaner, safer. The garbage was collected. The children were happy. You would go back home and it would seem, of course, that this was an act of God. You belonged where white people put you. It is only since World War II that there has been a counter image in the world. The image has not come about because of any legislation by an American government, but because Africa was suddenly on the stage of the world, and Africans had to be dealt with in a way they had never been dealt with before. This gave the American Negro, for the first time, a sense of himself not as a savage. It has created and will create a great many conundrums. One of the things the white world does not know, but I think I know, is that black people are just like everybody else. We are also mercenaries, dictators, murderers, liars. We are human too. Unless we can establish some kind of dialogue between those people who enjoy the American dream and those people who have not achieved it, we will be in terrible trouble. This is what concerns me most. We are sitting in this room and we are all civilized. We can talk to each other, at least on certain levels, so that we can walk out of these assuming that the measure of our politeness has some effect on the world. I remember when the ex-Attorney General, Mr. Robert Kennedy, said it was conceivable that in 40 years in America we might have a Negro president. That sounded like a very emancipated statement to white people. They were not in Harlem when this statement was first heard. They did not hear the laughter and bitterness and the scorn with which this statement was greeted. From the point of view of the man in the Harlem barbershop, Bobby Kennedy only got here yesterday, and now he is already on his way to the presidency. We were here for 400 years, and now he tells us that maybe in 40 years, if you are good, we may let you become president. Perhaps I can be reasoned with, but I don't know. Neither does Martin Luther King. None of us knows how to deal with people whom the white world has so long ignored, who don't believe anything the white world says and don't entirely believe anything I or Martin say. You can't blame them. It seems to me that the city of New York has had, for example, Negroes in it for a very long time. The city of New York was able in the last 15 years to reconstruct itself, to tear down buildings and raise great new ones, and has done nothing, whatever, except build housing projects, mainly in the ghettos for the Negroes. And of course, the Negroes hate it. The children can't bear it. They want to move out of the ghettos. If American pretensions were based on more honest assessments of life, it would not mean for Negroes that when someone says urban renewal, some Negroes are going to be thrown out into the streets, which is what it means now. It is a terrible thing for an entire people to surrender to the notion that 1/9 of its population is beneath them. Until the moment comes when we, the Americans, are able to accept the fact that my ancestors are both black and white, that on the continent we are trying to forge a new identity, that we need each other, and that I am not a ward of America. I am not an object of missionary charity. I am one of the people who built the country. Until this moment comes, there is scarcely any hope for the American dream. If the people are denied participation in it, by the very presence, they will wreck it. And if that happens, it is a very grave moment for the West. And this was published in the New York Times Magazine, March 7th, 1965. Child. James Baldwin is the truth. Nothing we didn't know before. That was the one. And it couldn't have come at a better time. I'm not even going to go in, because it's not what I came here for. But the HR 40 hearing, they had another one today. Child, a mess. and a half. And the HR 40 hearing is basically a hearing about reparations for the descendants of American child slavery. Why they have athletes, ex-athletes, diasporic blacks giving their opinions on what we're due on our debt, I have no idea. People, and not even the fact that they're just athletes or diasporic blacks, but people who are completely against it and who have no knowledge of why reparations is necessary at this point. It's very strange, nor the history, nor the data that is there in plain sight. Folks who just refuse to, it's very sinister. I'll just say that much. It's very orchestrated. You know, it's very strange. And, you know, Sheila Jackson Lee should not be in the position that she's in. She should not be over this committee. She should not be in the space to have anything to say whenever it comes to the descendants of American child slavery and the debt that is owed for us. Nor should any of those other people that were on that panel, especially the dude, Puerto Rican dude, who was in an interview last year, a couple of years before that, talking about how he just realized he was black. Like, and you sitting on a HR 40 panel telling us that we don't deserve reparations, and then you online in your underwear doing... Just insanity, y'all. I'm not gonna go in on that though. I think James Baldwin just did the talking for me. But I highly recommend y'all be involved in this conversation. Because again, you know, these conversations are very new. We're just now starting to have these conversations after over 100 years of not having that conversation, only having those conversations, you know, amongst ourselves. It's definitely time for us to be active in that conversation, and to do the work and to learn as much as you possibly can about what's been going on. I could go on and on about it, but I'm really not in the mood. But I love that essay. It was spot on, and so consistent with what we've already been talking about. I think we have such a long way to go. But I in speaking of now, because this was issued, this essay was issued in 1965. I think with everything that's going on and where we are within COVID and within just the conversations that we've been having, a lot of the activism that's been happening, a lot of people who've been showing up and doing the work and really doing the advocacy work, and really doing the political education work, I think we're going to be okay. I think folks are going to wake up. Folks are already woke. Folks are already doing the work. I think we'll get to the point to where enough will be enough. I know, especially after Biden's all these executive orders that he was dishing out that didn't include us, when we're disproportionately at the bottom, and after the past 400 years, but especially after this past summer that we had with the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all the others, the numerous amounts of black folks who died at the hands of the state and these, I don't even want to call them like vigilantes, they're racists. Racist demons. The people who were doing all of the murdering, we definitely deserve protective orders at the very least, and your president that y'all voted in did not even do that. But other communities got that. Very strange. Very strange, but I'm glad folks are connecting the pieces, connecting the dots, and hopefully things change. But I don't want to go on a rant about that HR 40, because maybe I'll do a separate video. I don't know. I need to process all of that, because it was a lot, and it really is a mess. I highly recommend y'all check it out. It's online. Check out the one from last year, which was a mess. You know, I remember the one last year, I was so frustrated because they had economists, they had people who were trying to speak. But again, Sheila Jackson Lee is like leading this whole thing and is letting who she wanted to speak, and not giving the people whose life work was this the time. Just very strange, very sinister, and again, like not having the right people in place to have this conversation. That room should have been, Sandy Arity should have been in that room. Definitely, credit has to be given where it's due. Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore have been doing the work. There's a ton of people. The sister who was there last year, who was very very adamant about making reparations happen and giving the data. She should have been in the room. But again, when she was in the room, they had actors and like random people. The old dude who was running around in his underwear and like just, I don't know. It's insanity. I can't make sense out of insanity, y'all. I really can't, but I'm not gonna try to. I'm glad we got to read tonight. I'm really glad I got to share that one. James Baldwin he's kind of had a resurgence in the past few years. Like people have kind of discovered his stuff again, which is great. But I just wonder and imagine where we'd be had he been given the space throughout his life that he very much so deserved, to be able to do his work here and to express himself as he, wanted to. I'm sure there were obstacles with him being a black gay man and not having that space with, our community. And I know he had a lot of success in Europe and in these white spaces and things like that, faux liberal spaces. And amongst us as well, because black folks love James Baldwin, but I know there were struggles and there were things that got in the way. I'm glad that people are rediscovering it. I'm glad that he's given his due. He's been given his due. And, his work is so necessary in the moment that we're in right now. So I'm glad to share it. With that being said, y'all, I'm going to get out of here. I'll be back tomorrow for day 18 as usual. And yeah, I'll talk to y'all then. Peace.